You have the floor, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, witnesses. Mr. Ouimet, in your statement to the Ethics Commissioner and other board director testimony before this committee, found that there was a process, I think, when you were about to consider an investment. That process was a few weeks beforehand, board members would get a list of investments that were being considered. Board members would let the SDTC know, the Secretary know, they had a conflict. And then they would be sent materials without those particular investments included in them. And then at the beginning of each meeting, my understanding is that the conflicts per director would be read out before the beginning of the meeting. Is that correct?
Oui.
Thank you. So to start off the meeting, every director knew which investments on the agenda each board member that was conflicted had an investment in, which is what you just confirmed. So the Auditor General over a 5-year period, went over 226 board approved transactions, which was a sample of the more than 400 during that period of time. Found 186 of those were conflicted. In other words, 82% of all transactions that were coming before the board were conflicted with board members or board members had an interest. Is that correct? So you were recusing yourselves or abstaining. Board members were 82% of the time.
Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Chair, the allegations of conflict of interest were made against me last year. A detailed investigation and a complex investigation was completed by the Ethics Commissioner. All of those issues of administrative problems and...
Mr. Ouimet, that was not my question, Mr. Ouimet. I would appreciate that you stick to answering the question out of respect for members of Parliament.
Attends. De l'ordre, s'il vous plaît.
Order, please, order. To the witnesses, members here have limited time. So when you answer, it's part of their time. So I encourage all participants. One moment, please. I always give the last answer to the witness. For the next 3.5 minutes, it's Mr. Perkins who has the opportunity to ask you questions. If members from both sides think that you are not answering as exactly as they wish to hear, it's their decision to interrupt you and ask you to start again.
3 minutes and 35 seconds, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will ask again, Mr. Ouimet. 82% of the time, according to the Auditor General, directors were conflicted in the transactions over the 5 years, and those overlap with your time on the board. So, Mr. Ouimet, when a board member or the committee is briefed that other board members have a conflict, do they recuse themselves or leave the room? Because your chair, Ms. Vacherian, didn't know the difference last week when she testified.
Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Chair, while I was on the board, I observed that all the administrators who had declared conflicts of interest recused themselves by not being present. There were gaps in the minutes or errors in the minutes. That's well accepted. We know that. So there are errors, but that can't be.
Action. You didn't actually leave the room. So let me go over this. So you were appointed in 2019. Annette Vacherian is appointed the chair, and you went to the CEO. She testified here before committee. She testified and said that you said direct conflicts of interest are now allowed. So I'm going to join the board that I was asked to join of a company that had already been doing businesses with SDTC. Is that correct? Did you say, well, now that conflicts are allowed, it's okay for me to join that board since it's doing business here and the chair is allowing that? By the way, that was Lithion.
J'avais exercé une option.
I exercised an option in that business after informing the board, and it had nothing.
The witness is not answering the question. I asked him if he said this, and he's going to what his investments were. I'll ask that question
Point
later.
of order. Point of
I
order,
would like
Mr.
the
Chair.
witness to answer the questions I'm asking.
Just point of
Yes,
order.
Mr. Drouin, yes.
I respect the fact that Mr. Perkins wants to ask questions. I'll remind him that we have interprets, and that if the witness is listening to the interpretation, it's really hard for those that are listening. It's hard on the ears of the interpreters. Merci.
Oui, merci beaucoup, Monsieur Drouin.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Ouimet.
Is your time? The clock is still talking because it is two languages here. If you could endeavor to allow time for Mr. Ouimet to hear your comments and vice versa. You do have the floor. I hear your point. We're just getting started. There'll be lots of opportunity to question the witnesses, many different directions. I'm going to turn things back over to you. You've got a minute and a half.
Mr. Ouimet, did you say, I'm going to join the board of Lithion now since Annette Basharian is the chair and conflicts are allowed? Yes or no?
No.
No.
That the CEO lied to committee.
I joined the board, but not because Annette Verschuren was there. I didn't know Annette Verschuren.
You were already on the board. You went to the CEO. The CEO has testified that you said you would join the board of Lithion now that Annette Basharian's on board because conflicts are allowed. Did you say that, yes or no? And it's important, and here's why.
I said no. How many times do you need no? This is no.
So you're saying the CEO lied?
I don't know what she said.
What is your 1% of Lithion worth today?
$11,000.
$11,000.
$11,000. And in that time, while you were on the board, Lithion on early 2022 got $4 million from SDTC. Is that correct?
Before I was appointed, it received $4 million.
Well, according to SDTC's records, it was in 2022 that it got $4 million. That's on their website. Are you saying that SDTC is wrong on their website?
L'investissement.
Well, there are some nuances here. The investment was approved in summer 2018 before I was appointed, and then it was provided little by little during the project. Thank you.
Suivant, we have Ms. Yip. Have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Kukucha, who contacted you to ask you to be on the board?
Honourable Member, no one contacted me. I applied through the Governor and Council appointment process, followed that process, and approximately, I think, 2.5 years later, I was appointed. So it was not a quick process. I thought that I could bring my skills and experience to the board and add value.
That, Mr. Ouimet, who contacted you to serve on the board?
Personne ne m'a.
Nobody contacted me because I have no affiliation within the political government world. I applied of my own initiative when I saw that the Governor and Council process because I thought I could contribute.
Kucha, you had, I don't know if you still do, but you had a financial interest, a small financial interest in Terra Mera and Mia Terra, right? I think they're the same company, essentially.
Yes, I made a very small investment in 2016, which was 5 years before my appointment to the board.
And in your opening, you said that you joined the board in February 2021 and that there had been no funding of the companies, mainly this one that you had an interest in, while on the board. But according to SDTC's records on the website, On March 30th, 2021, they approved $8 million for Terramera while you were on the board.
Honourable Member, I don't recall making the statement that no funding was made. I recall essentially my understanding as I joined February 2021, my first board meeting, and I was unaware this was something that the company had applied for. They received $7.9 million, which I recused myself when I moved out of the room for that funding decision.
But in your opening, you said the only thing that was after your appointment was COVID, so now you're changing the story. And Terramera received $4.5 million before you were on the board. Can you tell me what your interest in? The Auditor General identified a conflict for you with Rotolpitic Technologies. What's your involvement there?
The company was Rotolyptic Technologies. At one point, I sat on the board of that company, and I resigned from that position the moment I joined the SDTC board, and I had made an investment in them in 2017.
So you had an investment in them. And Equation Innovative Solutions?
Again, I had a very small investment in them I made in 2017. So if you see a pattern here, Honourable Member, it's most of these investments were made in 2016, 2017.
But you have an investment in them. That's good. So before and during your time on the board, those companies received almost $12.5 million, of which $8 million, more than three-quarters of that happened while you were on the board with one particular company. To me, that goes to the systemic conflict of interest we're seeing that directors had, where they were voting themselves 82% of their time money for each other's companies. Mr. Emet, Swirltech, why was that a conflict?
I indicated to the Auditor General that I did not know the Swirltech company. I have no links to it, and I have no idea why it's in the meetings. We did not understand why it's a business I do not know, and that has no links to me.
Inim?
Yes. Inim is a sister company of Lithium, with which I have no link. That is the sister company, but I declare the perception of conflict of interest since it is a sister company of Lithium, and I recused myself. Nano One Materials, that's a company that Lithium was a part of a consortium of the nano application, so I recused myself also.
Okay, so Enim, which is a sister company, meaning owned or it got $3 million from SDTC while you were on the board, and Nano One got $10 million. So again, it looks like a lot of conflicts of interest, of financial interest of you and your fellow directors. The Auditor General named 9 directors, some of them GIC, some of them not, that had conflicts of interest. So did it not seem unusual, since both of you are experienced directors, that have you ever served on a board where more than 80% of the transactions were conflicted when they came to the board? Mr. Emet?
I haven't done any kind of calculation as to the percentage on boards, but at each meeting where there were discussions as to this, there were 3 or 4 declared conflicts of interest, and usually it was a perception of conflict of interest, and people were very careful. It's not the same thing to actually have a conflict of interest than to have an appearance. So I don't have an interest in all the companies aside from Lithium that were declared. Thank you, Mr. Drouin. You're next.
5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Mr. Kakucha, in your opening statement, you said with respect to the improper COVID payments, of which $38.5 million tax dollars improperly went out the door according to the Auditor General, not to mention 63 conflicts of interest involving board members in which millions were funneled into companies in which board members had interests in, you said that you relied in good faith on legal advice. Is the legal advice that you, as a member of the board, received from one Mr. Ed Vandenberg?
Sorry, I was muted by the host. Yes, it was, Honourable Member.
Okay. The same Ed Vandenberg who sat on the two-person SDTC member council, correct?
You're correct, Honourable Member.
Yeah. So you're a lawyer, Mr. Kukucha, through you, Mr. Chair. Do you not see a conflict there that Mr. Vandenberg sat on the member council while at the same time providing legal advice to the board and being remunerated for such service?
There were discussions at the board about the structure of the member council and the challenges with it, and my understanding was management was trying to work with government to try and find a way forward with that. But yes,
Mr. Vandenberg had been providing legal advice to the board on other matters as well. It wasn't just in respect of the improper and unlawful COVID relief payments, right?
I keep getting muted. I apologize, Honourable Member. Yes, he was providing advice, and I do.
Thank you for that.
Mr. Cooper, just 1 second. So I'm sorry. I think what's happening is that when a witness is done speaking, we return to a member. You're being muted. So if you could just unmute yourself to both witnesses, avant que vous parlez, s'il vous plaît. If you could unmute yourself, that's what's happening. So. It doesn't always happen. I think it's because of just the. Well, anyway, for today, that's what has to be done. So, Mr. Cooper, you have 3 minutes, 15 seconds. The floor is yours again.
Mr. Kukucha, have you read the SDTC's enabling legislation, the Canada Foundation for Sustainable Development Technology Act? I presume you have.
You do need to, as I said, you do need to unmute yourself, sir. Back to you. There you go. Yeah, over to you.
Honourable Member, I have not read the entire Act. I have read the policies related to SDTC.
As a board member, surely you were familiar with the enabling legislation. I mean, I find it incredible if you weren't. I mean, that's a big problem in and of itself.
Sorry, I keep getting muted. I apologize, Honourable Member. I have a general overview of the legislation, but I have not read it in detail.
It sure isn't actually a very big piece of legislation. It would take all of 15 minutes to go through. And if you had bothered to read the Act, you would have known that at Section 16 sub 2, it states, quote, "No member shall profit or gain any income or acquire any property from the foundation or its activities." That's precisely what was happening in the case of Mr. Vandenberg. So not only was he in a conflict of interest in providing legal advice, he was breaking the law. Isn't that right?
Based on your statement, Honourable Member, I will take it at face value. I would only comment that once we got into the special committee process, I actually did flag for the board and management the issue of Mr. Vandenberg and ask he be removed, but he was not removed at that time.
So, again, conflicts of interest, money improperly going out the door, and reliance supposedly in good faith on counsel who was in a blatant conflict of interest and who was in blatant contravention of the SDTC Act. I mean, it's just unbelievable that you can come here with a straight face and defend the practices of SDTC and its board in the face of that. And speaking, Mr. Kukucha, of law breaking at SDTC, which you were complicit in, Mr. Vandenberg was part of a two-member council, a council that under the Act is required to have 15 members and requires 5 members to achieve quorum, and yet this two-person council appointed 5 directors to the SDTC board, all unlawful appointments. How do you explain that?
Honourable Member, when I joined the board, this system was in place and operational for many, many years. I did flag, and the board did have discussions.
In fact, the Auditor General, in her damning report, which you won't even concede or accept, said that the board that you sat on was complicit in this illegal activity. The board supported the law breaking. Isn't it part of a culture of corruption, self-dealing, and law-breaking? Isn't that what was going on? Because I would say to you, Mr. Kukucha, it raises serious questions about why the board would have been complicit in having an unlawful two-member council. It was all about making sure Liberal insiders and cronies of board members were appointed as directors so that they could get a piece of the action to pad their pockets in a corrupt racket that makes the sponsorship scandal look small by comparison. That's what happened.
You have the floor, sir, if you'd like a response.
Yeah, honourable member, I can only speak to my own conduct. I did not have, there was no corruption that I directly saw or was aware of or participated in. Errors were made. We acknowledge those. I did accept the results of the Auditor General's report, and candidly, I did flag for the board issues with both the Members' Council and Mr. Vanderberg, but they were not acted upon. As a new member to the board, all I could do was my best to raise issues, see if they were dealt with, and try to move the organization forward in a positive way. But I will concede errors were made for sure.
Thank you very much. That is a time, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Kukucha, you said that as a member of the board, you didn't even bother to read the enabling legislation, which would have taken all of 15 minutes. Did you take the time to read the contribution agreements with ICID? My time is...
Sorry, that was a direct question for Mr. Yes, Mr. Kukucha, did you catch that question, or is your he might be frozen?
Just stop that.
Yeah, we'll just suspend here for a second.
Is he pulling in a net for Sharon?
Yeah, here, I'll suspend the meeting until we can see if we can get the witness back. You can hear me all right? Just give me a thumbs up.
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Perfect. Puis Mr. Ouimet, ça va aussi avec vous?
Mr. Ouimet, it's fine for you also? Yes, very well. Okay, thank you.
Mr. Cooper, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Mr. Kukucha, you said you hadn't bothered to read the SDTC Act, which, if you had, you would have realized that the legal advice you were receiving and the board was receiving was in contravention of the Act. Have you bothered to read the contribution agreements with ICID?
And honourable member, as I was started in my last answer, the contribution agreements were negotiated between management and the companies. So they were all individual to projects.
You
so we did
sat
not
on
have
the
access
board.
to them.
You sat on the board, and you were voting yes or no in respect of funneling money out the door. And had you bothered to read the contribution agreements, you would have learned that when you voted to approve millions of dollars in COVID funding, putting aside the conflicts of interest, that it was also in contravention of the contribution agreements with ICID. But you didn't bother to read those agreements, did you?
Honourable member, the COVID approvals that were made, the second COVID approvals, I was only on the board for the second COVID approvals, came to us with a blanket set of funds with no list of companies to give management discretion. And when I asked management whether or not this was in, because I specifically asked the question, and other board members did as well, whether or not this was in contravention or whether or not it was approved by government. Management confirmed it was approved by government, and there was no
dissent of the contribution agreements. And you said, or at least Mr. Ouimet said and Ms. Verschaeren said in their testimony, that the board approved those funds because SDTC's portfolio companies were struggling during COVID. But you know, sir, that isn't true.
Honourable Member, I do know a lot of companies were struggling during COVID. So we took it on face value that management had canvassed all the companies and had
face value, sir.
Information.
Sir, through you, Mr. Chair, it's my time, reclaiming my time.
Order, gentlemen. As I said, we're trying to safeguard the interpreters here as well as maintain decorum. Mr. Cooper, you have the floor, please.
The whistleblower testified that at the time of the second tranche of the improper and unlawful so-called COVID relief payments, of which you were then on the board, SDTC had completed a full survey of the total portfolio of SDTC companies and found that every single company on average had over 14 months of runway, proving that the companies that received the money didn't need the money. You would have seen that analysis, wouldn't you have?
Honourable Member, we did receive the analysis. I can't speak to the specific facts you mentioned, but there were concerns with supply chain. There were concerns with a number of issues, and even companies that I was involved with that had no involvement with SDTC were deeply concerned about those. So
14 months of runway. 14 months of runway, and the money went out the door. Yet, sir, had nothing to do with COVID relief and everything to do with funneling money into the companies in which board members had interest. And that's what really was going on. Mr. Ouimet, when you last appeared before this committee in December, you stated that at SDTC, quote, the conflict of interest management procedures are rigorously followed. Do you stand by that?
Absolument.
Absolutely. The procedures have been respected, but the documentation did not reflect it at certain points, and it was recognized by the Auditor General, and it's been noted.
Mr. Ouimet, you keep claiming that the minutes were the problem, not that there were conflicts of interest, not that money improperly went out the door, that there were inaccuracies in the minutes. But Ms. Lawrence stated, and I'm referring to paragraph 69 of the Verscheren report, in which Ms. Verscheren was found guilty by the Ethics Commissioner, that with respect to the minutes, they were carefully reviewed and amended internally where necessary and should be considered accurate. Is Ms. Lawrence wrong? Is that what you're saying?
Je ne peux parler que pour moi-même.
I can only speak for myself.
I didn't hear the answer.
He said he can only speak for himself. You have a small question time remaining, Mr. Cooper.
Well, I'll ask Mr. Ouimet if you would apologize to Canadians for the conduct of the board. 186 conflicts of interest, $38.5 million in COVID relief payments that improperly went out the door, millions of which went into companies of board members. Would you apologize and admit that that should not have happened?
Non, je reconnais les...
No. I recognize the findings of the Auditor General, and the statements of the Honourable Member are false.
That turns us now to Ms.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Kakucha, earlier, how much was your initial investment in Terramera?
In 2016, I made a $15,000 investment, Honourable Member.
And what is that worth today?
Honourable Member, I do not know. This is a private company that, and I'm cautious because it's a private Canadian company trying to do good work. I know they went through a split of some sort, so I could not tell you what that's worth today.
How about Rhodolyptic? What was your initial investment there?
My initial investment there, sir, was $200,000.
And what's that worth today?
Again, as a private company, I do not know the valuation of that, and I would not want to speculate, but let me say that I don't think either company has, I think both companies have seen challenges over this last couple of years, so Like anything with venture capital, these are risky
And
investments.
Echo Asian Innovative, if I'm pronouncing that right, how much was your initial investment?
Again, it was a very small amount of $15,000 in 2017.
And I assume the same thing on current valuation.
Correct, Honourable Member.
Okay. Mr. Chair, I would like to move a motion right now, if I could.
Just hold on. I'm going to deal with this matter with Mr. Kakucha. Mr. Kakucha, here's how we generally proceed. The request has been put to you. You seemed agreeable. If you could check then on your ability to provide us those notes. If you cannot, for legal reasons, please get back to us. As I'm sure you know, the committee can move to have you submit them, which then elevates it, and then there are other steps after that. We don't normally go from 0 to 60 at the first blush. We don't typically need to do that. As I said, you seem to be agreeable. So if you could provide those notes or get back to us with a detailed explanation as to why you cannot. Would that be agreeable for now?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. That matter is settled in for now. Mr. Perkins, you have the floor, please.
Thank you. I'd like to, and the clerk can circulate this if she wishes.
Why don't we hear the motion first so I can ensure it's
That with
in
regard
line.
to the committee's ongoing study of SDTC, and given that, one, the Deputy Secretary to Cabinet of Privy Council, Nylon stated that the selection processes or application-based positions are advertised through notices of opportunity on the Privy Council website. And as I have said from the outset, we would post a notice of opportunity on our website. We would invite people to apply. We would assess those applications. And given, two, former Minister Navdeep Bains said that the process is an open and fair and transparent process that publicly available to all individuals. Anyone who wants to apply can do so. It's open to anyone. And given, three, Annette Verschuren, former chair of SDTC, stated I never applied for the position of the chair of SDTC, and that there were indications that I was requested. The committee therefore expressed its deep concern with the contradictions between Ms. Verschuren's testimony and the former Minister Navdeep Bains and PCO appointments, and therefore agree to A, order the production of PCO's letter of advice to Minister Bains for the Governor and Council appointment of Annette Verschuren, Guillemette, and Steve Kakucha in both official languages without redactions within 14 days following the adoption of this motion. B, order the production of a copy of Annette Verschuren, Guillemette, and Stephen Kakucha's application to Privy Council office to serve on the board of SDTC, if it exists, in both official languages without redactions within 14 days following the adoption of this motion. C, order the production of any briefing notes, letters, memorandums provided to Minister Bains, former Deputy Minister John Newbley, or Hilary Leftick, former from PCO, that were prepared as part of Ms. Verschuren's candidacy as chair in both official languages without redactions within 21 days following the adoption of this motion. And D, hold 2 meetings on SDTC within 14 days following the adoption of this motion and invite former Minister Navdeep Bains, Don Allen McClintmolt, and Hilary Leftick to provide clarity on the contradictory testimony.
Just 1 second, Mr. Perkins. I'm just going to suspend just for a second, consult with the clerk, and get the motion distributed on the floor, and then I'll turn to a speaking list. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. During her appearance last week at the Industry Committee, I asked the former chair, Annette Verschuren, when and who called her to be on this board, and she said, I don't know exactly the date. It was a couple of times, I think, he spoke to me, he being the Minister Bains, about this, as did his policy advisor. And then I said, they called you to see if you would do this. And she said, yes. Then I asked her, and I said, in the interview, they said that the government approached you. Is that correct? And she said, that's correct. And I asked her, had you applied before you spoke with Minister Bains or after? And Ms. Verschuren said, I never applied for the position of chair of SDTC. I never applied. And then she subsequently went on another question of mine to say, I've never applied for anything in my life, a very egotistical statement. And then in response further on, she again, when I asked her again, she said, "Mr. Chair, I believe the situation was that there were indications that I was requested to consider to be an applicant for this." So she never applied. Yet Minister Baines, when he was before committee, said he got a list from PCO that only had people that applied. And the PCO said that PCO appointments, head of PCO appointments, which works for the Prime Minister, said they only provided names of people who had applied. Spontaneously, several days after the fact, Ms. Vacharian's changed her mind again, but I believe the testimony she gave before committee when she said 3 times she never applied, and that this government asked her to do this as they were pushing the former chair, Jim Balsillie, out the door because he had criticized the government in the Ethics Committee for their lack of attention to privacy breaches and the surveillance economy, and a particular breach by Facebook, which, in previous testimony, the minister made clear on several occasions to former President Leah Lawrence of the Green Slush Fund that was irritating the Prime Minister and the government, and could you not get him to be quiet? So we've got all this contradictory testimony that's here, and as such, these individuals need to come back and clarify just exactly how did all this happen. And the reason is because in the history of SDTC, there has only been, and it's more than 20-year history, there's only been one chair that, when appointed and during her appointment, was conflicted. Where Minister Baines told her, and where ADM Noseworthy, who sat in the meetings from ISED, said, we will manage the conflicts. And we've had testimony here today from Mr. Emet and testimony from the former president that said once Ms. Vacharian was appointed, Mr. Emet came to them and said, I'm going to go on this board of this company. I wasn't allowed to go on before because it was a conflict, but now conflicts are okay. I'll go on the board, and that company continued to get more money from SDTC while Mr. Emet was on the board. And the 82% of all transactions that happened in that audit where directors were voting conflict of interest money to boards, they had a total, by the way, of $330 million for that, according to the Auditor General. No wonder Mr. Kukucha and Mr. Emet won't acknowledge the Auditor General's report, because they don't like what she found, which was the truth, that $330 million was voted to companies that board members had interest in. So this contradictory stuff needs to be addressed. I know, Mr. Chair, that on the original motion on the study, these individuals, former Minister Baines, who's now in charge of the highest cell phone prices in the world at Rogers, and the other PCO officials as well as PMO officials need to be in this room, in this meeting, to be held accountable for these contradictions and whether or not they overrode the appointments process to put a political appointee in place in this manner.
Thank you.
I'd like to go back to this Auditor General report. Maybe I could start with Mr. Kukucha, and then Mr. Emet. But Mr. Kukucha, there were board members that had more conflicts of interest than others, and one of them was Andre Lise-Matot, who is named the most in the Auditor General's list of that. When I look down the list of companies that her company, Cycle Capital, is invested in, it looks hard to me to see that she could ever be in a board meeting, that she was recusing herself all the time. Did you see her leaving the room a lot?
Honourable member, I joined the board at a time, but I believe it was Ms. Mathot's last meeting. So I was not privy to any of the previous work or conflicts she declared.
Mr. Emet?
Yes, I participated in the council with Ms. Mathod. She was there before I was, and she left before the end of my mandate during a time when I observed her behaviors. Every time a conflict was declared, she recused herself from the virtual meeting room.
Encurum Alberta Inc., MindSense, Spark Microsystems, Concentric Agriculture, Polyservant, ViewReal, Cell Fuel, Green Mantra Technology, Crystal Labs, Borealis Wind, Development Efficient, Equisphere, Global Spatial Technology Solutions, Fractual Systems, GHG Satellite Inc., Helen Inc., Horatio Inc., Metamaterial Technologies, Peak Power, Pure Solid Treatment Solutions, Terramera, Advanced Intelligence Systems, Anomera Inc., Cell Fuel Inc., I guess, and Chrysalis and Fractual Systems. Total $114 million, Mr. Emet, while she was on the board, that the financial interests of her venture capital firm had interest in all this. Awful lot of transactions that she left the room for. She probably wasn't in the room very much then, is that right? She was out of the room by the looks of all of these all the time. That's $114 million. Do you think it's appropriate that a board member had $114 million invested in companies she had a financial interest in during her time on the board?
Monsieur le Président, je n'ai jamais...
Mr. Chair, I wasn't closely following her interests. All I can say is that I observed her behavior, and my memory is that she declared a conflict of interest and recused. I won't weigh in further on that.
You weren't following her interests. Pretty hard not to when they brief you at the beginning of every meeting of the conflicts that each director has, and then go about voting for those projects that director has when she has them. And Mr. Kikuchi, you referenced that she left the board when you did. Are you aware that she left the board and went to Canada's Infrastructure Bank as a board member?
Honourable Member, I did not track Ms. Matheau's activities post-SDTC in the one board meeting I sat in with her.
You're not aware of her testimony here that she got $170 million from the Infrastructure Bank board while Ms. Matheau went over there?
Honourable Member, I was not.
The issue, just one last thing, Mr. Kikuchi, you hadn't read the Act when you got on the board. When I joined the BDC board, I read the BDC Act. It's not a difficult thing. You should always do that when you join a board. Secondly, the contribution agreements, you don't seem to know what they were. They are not the agreements between SDTC and the company being invested.
Your question,
They
Mr.
are,
Perkins.
I said, directed limits on what you can spend on. Did you read the ISED directed contribution agreements before you participated with everyone else in voting money outside of those terms to companies?
Honourable Member, there's two types of contribution agreements. The contribution agreements that are made between the companies and the organization when funding is granted, and those were the agreements I was referring to. And yes, I take your point. There is an agreement between the government and the broader organization with regard to funding flowing. That document was not made available to me as part of my onboarding package, so I did not have an opportunity to read that.
Thank you very much. Mr. Durain, to hear from, Mr. Perkins, you have the floor, and then it's Ms. Khalid will end us out of this. Mr. Perkins, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Kikuchi, I want to go back to how I ended my last session because something you said sort of astounded me. So just for folks watching, anyone that's following, because this is a complicated issue, the Green Slush Fund and this. Parliament appropriates money to be spent and transferred to the foundation, as it's called, in the green technology space. Over the years, that's been about $22 billion, but the last batch was about $750 million. And the fence posts, the guideposts for the foundation board in spending that are called contribution agreements between the industry department and says you can spend Parliament's money on this and only this. And the Auditor General found that in many instances, the board had gone outside of that, particularly the COVID payments, but other instances. A total of about $58 million was spent in the 5 years she looked at that were outside of the contribution agreements. In other words, against the rules that Parliament approved the money for. So you mentioned, Mr. Kikuchi, that when you, in the orientation package, when you became a director, they did not give you the contribution agreements to review, so you understood those guideposts. Is that correct?
Mr. Chair, to the best of my recollection, they did not provide that, and I defer to Mr. Ouimet's testimony where this was legislation that had not been updated, and we essentially were working in a system where it was my understanding that was provided both verbal confirmation by the CEO and from the ADM present that we were working within the government's approval.
So the question then is, and you were both on the investment committee, so how do you make these decisions without knowing the parameters? I mean, you said that the ADM was there. So the Auditor General referred to the fact that the Assistant Deputy Minister, a senior bureaucrat in the Industry Department, sat in every board meeting, every single board meeting. And we're to believe that the minister didn't know what was going on when he had an official there. You're saying, and in the Auditor General's report, it says that the official, the board interpreted the official not objecting as agreement that what the board was doing was correct. Did you feel that way?
Honourable Member, we on the investment committee, we were aware of the general parameters of why we would be making investments around. There were environmental targets, there was GHG reductions, there was circular economy. There's a whole lot of criteria that we judged projects by and that the expert reviewers reviewed by. So when projects came to the project review committee, we very much had a set of criteria which we reviewed them against and worked very hard to do so.
You don't know that those criteria, whether they were actually consistent with the ISED, the Industry Department's contribution agreement, since you never saw them.
As stated, I don't recall receiving a copy of that in my orientation material, but that was a very long time ago, and a lot has happened since then.
Well,
obviously,
Mr. Ouimet was appointed long before you. So, Mr. Ouimet, did you have access to the contribution agreements at any time from your orientation on the board?
Absolument.
Yes. I read the contribution agreements, and I was perfectly aware of them. And I saw how the investment plans evolved. Just to give you a quick example.
You saw them.
Yes, I was aware of them.
Still approved money outside the contribution agreement then, since you were aware of them.
Non, j'ai approuvé des investissements en conformité.
No, I approved investments in accordance with the government's investment guidelines. And
Right of that,
sorry.
Time is up. Ms.